We are heading into the home stretch. There's 3 more sessions left on the most important stage, otherwise known as the grow stage. And right now, we are going to be talking to 3 industry experts about something very near and dear to my heart. This is the, what are we calling this? Tell your story or die trying. Now, as a journalist, I receive a lot of press releases and a lot of pitch decks. And I'll be honest with them, some of them are absolute bullshit. So, to learn how to not serve people like me loads of bullshit, let's welcome Joanna Kirk to the stage. She is going to be leading the discussion. I will let you take it away, madam.
Thank you, Dan. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Mic's on. Please welcome the panelists. So, we're going to try and answer this question, which is kind of an important question, I think, in 15 minutes. So let's go for it. So would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yes, of course. So my name is Marie. Hi, everyone. I have been doing comms and PR and branding for VC investors and their portfolio companies for almost a decade now. So I have been telling many stories, and I'm happy to share some insights and discuss with you guys.
My name is James Clark. I'm Marketing Director at Molten Ventures. We're a publicly listed pan-European VC.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm the MD at Ballou UK. We're a pan-European communications agency working with B2B and B2C technology companies, primarily at Series A, but also beyond. We work with companies like Mozilla, Red Hat, Box, Udacity, many more besides.
We did it.
We said we'd do a very short intro, and that was just a very good example of how you can do a very concise storytelling also. And this is my first question, actually. What do you think is a good story?
I can start if you want. So look, one of the really important things when we talk to clients about how to tell their story is to step back away from their company and try and look at what they're actually doing that fits into a broader narrative. I think lots of company founders, senior teams are very much head down in their product, head down in the day-to-day, feel very much like they have to focus on that, focus on the sort of product features and all the rest of it. And what we try and do as a firm is, like I said, take that step back. So what is it that your company is doing that fits into a broader narrative? Where are you relevant to a sort of broader story that's out there in the world? And often that involves talking about the broader problem that you're trying to solve. It is amazing how many founders we talk to that actually start to stumble a little bit over that problem. And that's actually often the most interesting part of the story.
Mm.
I think I'm not a comms person by background, I'm a marketer by background. And I think one of the misconceptions of marketing is that it's a broadcast function. Mm-hmm. But marketing is an audience insights function. So our job is to understand who our customers are so we can take that information in and bring it into the business. And that can be used for business decisions or it can be used for communications and marketing. And so the upshot of that is, before you tell the story you're going to tell, you need to understand what story your audience want to hear. And therefore, you can pitch the story that is most likely to get the outcome you want because you're telling people the story that they most want to hear.
Hmm. Would you like to add to
No,
that?
I mean, I fully agree. If you ask me what's a good story, the question would always be a good story for who, right? Who you're talking to, what are they interested in, what will be exciting for them. And then at the same time, by nature, you have different audiences, and then you need to be something that is really like consistent and compelling for all of your audiences. So always ask for who, right? So completely agree. Very simple question, but I think that's the key.
It's not that simple, I think, and I would guess the audience, before getting to the audience, you also have potentially journalists, and as Dan was saying, it's difficult to cut through the noise because there's so much, there's never been as much content and as much going on. So I think that we were discussing this a bit earlier, there is also something about the timing. Is it always necessarily good to come out with your story, or is it sometimes better to not come out with a story, nothing?
Look, it depends. So as a venture capitalist, we work very closely with our portfolio companies as they make the funding announcement. The funding announcement is kind of them signaling that we've become involved. But I think there's a temptation for VCs and their portfolio companies to think that funding announcement is the most important thing. But often cases, everybody pitches funding announcements. It's quite a boring story to write. So we like to work with journalists to help us understand what stories they want to tell. So therefore, it becomes a case of, okay, if you're a portfolio company that has raised capital, what are you doing that's interesting? Are you expanding to a new territory? Are you hiring people? Are you releasing a new product? And then connect that to the funding announcement. So company X does all this interesting stuff. Oh, and the funding announcement, the funding helps them to do that more. And I think that becomes a more compelling story for somebody to want to tell than VC puts money into company X and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
We said this sort of earlier off stage, and is it a case of or die trying with telling your story? And I think it's so important. We often say to our clients that if you don't tell your story, someone else will tell it for you. So there will come a point in your growth journey as a company where something great will happen. Like you say, there'll be a funding announcement. You will score an amazing client. You'll be on an amazing growth tear. You will have a point at which all of a sudden you will find yourself the focus of attention in some shape or form. If you haven't got ahead of that, and if you don't have a story to tell, you've already lost control of that narrative of how people are actually talking about your company. And that, when we talk about that, we don't just mean in things, in sort of media, on social media. We also just mean at events like this, when people are speaking to each other about the people that they've met, the companies that they've seen on stage. You can really see the companies that have done really well in terms of getting ahead of it and making sure that story is understood before these great things have happened to them.
Yeah, maybe just another aspect to add. So when I work with founders and I ask them, so what's your story? And they, this is my story and this is crystal clear. So it's very much the story they're used to pitching to investors. So they have a certain kind of perspective always, which is a great thing when you go fundraising. You really have to have this kind of laser focus. But then, once you go out and talk to more audiences, more stakeholders, you say, okay, are you sure this is your story? Isn't there even more? So I think this is also one of our roles, is really challenging also people who are really convinced of their story. Sometimes you have to really kind of challenge it and make it different and make it more interesting. So
this is where it feeds back into the fundamentals of marketing, because it's not just the founder going out and telling the story, it's the salesperson, it's the receptionist, it's everyone in the company at some point is going to be talking about what the company does. And so that fundamental aspect of marketing is getting a clear idea of what your company does and what it stands for and how you want to talk about that, and trying to workshop what you think the occasions when somebody would be telling that story, and having not a script, but just something that a central point of truth that everyone can agree to, so that when they are speaking to people about what their particular part of it is there's a consistency to it, even if it's not the same exact language.
That's even more important because of the number of different channels that they are now to communicate. Yeah. And in some cases, you can have kind of different messages that make it not that easy to understand what the company actually does or what's going on. And we're talking about having one story, but I think that there's also building a story, and a story will evolve, or actually maybe one day you'll be changing that story. So,
well, I mean, we talk about this different audiences thing. So Molten Ventures is a publicly listed VC. So on one hand, we talk to public market investors and the markets in general, but also we talk to founders and other VCs in the media and other parts of our ecosystem. And what one audience hears can't be negated by what the other audience hears. So you might say something that's incredibly positive to founders, but if our public market investors, they'd heard it, they go, hang on, what are you doing? And so every piece of communication we put out has to work, if not net positive for all those audiences, but at least is net neutral with a positive to the other audiences. So the application for a startup is, well, okay, you might be talking to your sales customers, but also the stuff that you're putting out to your sales customers can be received by other competitors in the industry, or journalists in the industry, or other potential investors in the industry, and you need to think about how those messages will be received by those different audiences. It sounds incredibly complicated, and it kind of is, because you need to put a lot of thought into how those things are received.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. There's a real skill in getting all of those disparate stories into something that works for pretty much all of your sort of stakeholders, for your key audiences. There's a reason why it's story and not stories. There is a sort of, your company really, I feel a company should have a sort of central story that it can tell in any given environment to any type of audience, and they understand what that company is trying to do, what its mission is, what its purpose is, whatever it might be. And it feels like it's a really simple thing, and we should all have it. We even struggle with it as an agency. How do you get that story out there, and how do you make sure that we're telling us, the same story to everyone? It's really difficult. Getting that simplicity is really tough, but I think is something that's really, for founders, really worth working on.
And I guess you can definitely try your best and believe that you have the best story and that it's going to work, and still, in some cases, we'll know that it just doesn't work. Have you had any of these examples, or just, readapting the angle so that it works better?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the timing before, right? So I work a lot. I work with FoodLabs and Atlantic Labs that are Berlin-based early-stage investors, but I'm also running my own little boutique consultancy, and I work a lot with early-stage founders. So as an early-stage founder, you're rarely working on sometimes you do, but most of the times you're working in the space, you're not the only one, right? And you want to bring that story out there, and then sometimes someone comes out with the news just a bit earlier than you, and all the narrative you've been building, and that feels authentic and good for you, is just taken by someone else. So I think that happens quite often, but you cannot look in other people's minds, right? You're not going to know what they go out with, what kind of story. So yes, I think particularly working with early stage companies, you have to be creative and agile and still kind of find your way of going out there, right? So maybe tweak it a bit, but yes, I mean, that is a challenge that kind of we work with every day, or I work with every day. Yeah.
It's all about the context. It's not just the story. It's like adapting to the last minute changes also.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, and then I think also be authentic, right? You cannot tell someone else's story. You have to do it your way. And I always keep telling founders, so this is your story. Make it personal, make it authentic, and that will make it also strong, right? Mm-hmm. So because no one does it the way you do it. And it's important to find out where that USP is, where that difference is, and really play on that.
That's actually true, and it's one of those thoughts. So, Molten Ventures branded in November last year, rebranded, and in those circumstances, it's very tempting as a marketing person to try and have as much control as possible over the messaging that you're putting out there. But you don't want to give people scripts because it's not going to sound authentic to how they would talk. So what you really try and have to work very hard to do is to understand everyone across your team, from the receptionist to the senior partners who are out there pitching to startups, what the key aspects of the rebrand in our case was about, and how they can then talk about those things in a way that feels authentic to them. And if that's if people generally get the idea of what you're going for, if it's not the exact script, that's a much better outcome than something sounding robotic or somebody stumbling over the words or something else like that.
Yeah.
I think it has to be exciting as well. People have to feel excited about your story and your message. I mean, I think there has to be like almost a sort of breathlessness to it when
it's hard to make a script sound exciting.
Well, quite, yeah.
Yeah. So it is but that's what it is. People talking about stuff that is core and central to them, that is meaningful to them, is going to sound more exciting than the marketing guy made me read this fucking script, and I can't believe he's making me do this, and it sounds so awkward when I say it out loud. And you have to be cognizant of that.
My old boss always said to me that the PR meeting had to be the client's favorite meeting of the week, because everything had to be. It had to be a sense. There had to be a sense of excitement to it. So yeah, it's easy to talk in these generalities, but actually in reality, we know it's really difficult for founders to get this right.
I think we have a couple of minutes left. I was curious to know if you had any examples of either, wow, this was such a great example of a good story, that really kind of inspired you, or on the contrary, maybe the kind of no-goes, never do it that way again.
I'm not going first.
A lot, actually. I mean, I think the worst thing, I wouldn't want to pinpoint to anything, but stuff that's just boring, right? You've seen it so many times. You say, okay, they just took that story out of that drawer and this and that. So, I mean, just random stuff. We see that so often. So, I mean, that's probably one of the worst things you see every day.
It's a little bit different. Whereas touched on it before, though, is for founders, there is a tendency to get caught up in the narrative of the founder and the journey they had to get to build the company. And as a founder, part of your job is to start to transition your founding story into the existence of the company because the company becomes important. But the downside of it is your founding story can become a bit of a trap where if it's not interesting enough, you need to find ways to embellish it. And the more you embellish it, eventually it starts to be pulled apart, like the string starts to be pulled and the sweater comes apart. So I would say don't embellish, but find a compelling way to talk about it, but also transition the story onto the company. Try not to get too caught up in that founder story, because that can become a little bit of a cliche over time.
Yeah, embellishing can bring you too far away.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to build on that, you're absolutely right. The story shouldn't just be focused on the individual or the actual company itself. Like I said at the start, the thing that gets, I think, is where sort of storytelling works really well is when you fit it into that broader narrative, is when you have that sense of inevitability about what the company is doing. That if you can fit it into that sort of mega trend that's going on, then all of a sudden you find yourself relevant. And you find yourself being talked about, and people will understand what you're trying to do as a company. And that's, like I say, that's where it starts to get really exciting.
Yeah, okay. Very good. I think that we are just on time, because I can see Dan.
The story you want
Thank
to
you very
tell
much.
is wrap it up. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how you tell your story.